Hi, this is Richard Edelman, and you're listening to the TrustMakers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Smita Reddy, the U.S. Chair of Brand at Edelman. I'm joined this week by Mita Mallick, Head of Inclusion, Equity, and Impact at the equity management software firm Carta. Mita is a passionate storyteller, DEI thought leader with over a decade of experience building trust and iconic brands, including Aveeno, Chapstick, Suave, and Dove. She's also the co-host of the Brown Table Talk podcast, which is now part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. She was also recently named a top voice on LinkedIn. Prior to her role at Carta, Mita was the head of diversity and cross-cultural marketing at Unilever. Mita, welcome to the TrustMakers. Let's get started.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Well, we're so excited to have you because, first of all, I should also start because Mita and I go way back. Mita was my client when she was at Unilever. She actually hired us on our first project for Vaseline in the United States. But really what started was like a really deep friendship since then. And so Mita and I have connected on so many things throughout the industry. The fact that we've both been brown women in the industry, I think, has been a big point of discussion and topic. But, you know, I'm just so happy that you can join us here. You're always a friend to Edelman, always been a champion of our work, and we're always a champion of you. So just thank you for
Thank you
being
so much.
here.
And you know, I've known you for close to 7 years because you met me when I was expecting with my daughter and she turned 7 in May. And so isn't that funny? I use my kids, how old they are, to sort of remember things in my life. But yeah, I met you. I remember then.
Yeah, it's just such an indication of our friendship because I think we've like been through each other during the ups and downs of our career, but also having kids in the marketing and corporate world is really tough and how to navigate that. And so on many ways, I feel very connected to you, Mita.
Thank you.
So let's like start with your story because I know you so well, but I want the world to know you. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to marketing, building trust in brands, and how did that ultimately lead you to the DE&I space?
Well, it starts at the very beginning. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. My younger brother and I were born and raised in the US, spent most of our time growing up in Massachusetts. And I was always the, funny looking, dark skinned girl with the long, funny looking braid. Back then I had hair down to my knees, a single braid, whose parents spoke funny English. I had funny smelling looking lunches. Our minivan played funny music until it wasn't funny anymore, right? I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically growing up by my peers. We were only a handful of families of color. And that feeling of never feeling like you belong. I don't ever want anyone to feel that, ever. It's so painful. And, I always say now, joking, not joking, I never expected those bullies in the schoolyards and classrooms to follow me into corporate America. Certainly graduate school or just my schooling didn't prepare me for the everyday aggressions that I'd be facing. And then I think when I get to the storytelling part, if you know what I've just shared, you know what I just shared with you about me, it's not surprising that I was painfully shy growing up, not introverted, painfully shy. So I read a lot, I wrote a lot, and I doodled all the time. I loved watching TV. I loved watching movies, but I never saw myself reflected. I'm sure, Smita, you feel that way too. I'm like, there's no one who looks like me, acts like me, thinks like me. Where are my stories? And I just was fascinated. Like, who gets to pick who's on screen? Who gets to pick who's on the magazine cover? I read a lot of Essence, which my Black girlfriends were like, you read Essence? And I was like, what was I supposed to read? Yeah, I read Essence. I was looking for role models. And so I think that's what really ended up those early experiences. It's why I ended up in marketing, because I wanted to change that for others. I wanted to change that for our kids so that they were growing up in a different world where they saw themselves reflected.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's so much about your story that I resonate with, especially also being painfully shy, which people find so interesting now that I'm in the communications industry. They're like, wait, what? You don't stop talking. And I'm like, I think I think it's because we grew up not seeing representation, right? And I think that definitely has a deep, deep impact on us. And you were sort of ahead of the curve, right? When you think about marketing and wanting to see that representation and knowing that there's more stories to tell. But what I think what's interesting about you is, Mita, we touched upon this at the top, right? You started in marketing, moving into the DE&I space, and now you're going into the content creation space with Brown Table Talk, which is such an interesting show. And I would love for you to give us a little bit of background on what you guys cover on Brown Table Talk, because I think it's such an interesting, unique forum for real conversations of what happens in the workplace.
Well, Brown Table Talk is really a reflection of a deep friendship, just like I have with you, Smita, my deep friendship and love and respect for my co-host, DC Marshall. I met her in 2017, had come back from maternity leave, was at a big conference, saw her on stage, and immediately sparked to her. And she became my coach. I was going through a really painful experience at work. She coached my team. I brought her in for business, and then we just became friends. I always joke, I'm the client she can't get rid of. But we, over the years, would just talk about all of these things that she would hear clients struggling with, the things I was going through. And we had thought about this idea for a podcast, and finally we did it, which was really about sharing the stories, unpacking the truth about what women of color face in their workplaces, workspaces. And we don't want to be surviving. We want to be thriving. And so we share these stories and we leave tips at the end. And one of the most surprising things, Smita, that came out of all of this is that I knew it would resonate with women of color, but naturally, because Dee and I just love talking to each other, just like I love talking to you, we were just like bantering back and forth. And I would ask her last year as we were doing these episodes, like, okay, so let's talk about the ally's perspective. Like a white man listening to this conversation, how would we want him to do better, be better? And so out of that, we had lots of women of color come to us saying, oh my God, it's like you're reading my personal journal. And then I had white men in my life reach out to me saying, first of all, I didn't know you went through this. I wish you had trusted me to share these stories because I didn't at the time trust them. And I'm just a huge fan because now I feel like I'm part of these stories that I've never heard. Like no one's actually really opening. Like women of color are talking to themselves about it. But wow, now I have a seat at the table, ironically, that like I was never given as a white man. Like now I can come and listen to this story.
What I love about the show, and I hope our listeners actually now after this podcast go and check out Brown Table Talk, is the focus on inclusion. Right. And so a lot of corporations have been making commitments about DE&I goals, how they want to increase diversity in their organization. Our own Edelman Trust Barometer has, really been digging into what we call the belief-driven employee. And employees are really demanding more, right? They're saying 61% say they choose to leave, avoid, consider employers based on their values and beliefs, right? And 76%, 3 in 4, have a much higher expectation for a prospective employer than they did 3 years ago. And we're in the midst of a great resignation right now where talent is king, right? But oftentimes we don't talk about how hard inclusion is, right? And the work that goes into that. And so what has been some of the more eye-opening? I know, there's lots of stories in terms of the experiences that both you and Dee have gone through. But I would love to hear more about like, what do you think is working well in inclusion, right? What are some practices and behaviors when people do inclusion really well? And where are some areas where there's a lot more to work on?
There's a stat I saw before the diversity tipping point, which my co-host of Brown Table Talk coined May 2020. So pre the diversity tipping point, we were already spending billions of dollars. Like I think the number I saw was like 8 or 9 on diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And I'm sure that's skyrocketed. This is important. People want resources and support. But here's the thing, Smita. It's like, I can do as much work as I want in our workplaces and spaces around inclusion. And the work starts at home. The work starts at our kitchen tables. I cannot undo who you are and how you spend your time when you show up on screen, or you show up to a training, or you show up for help. And so even when I go back to those earlier moments of my life as a child, it's like, I think about now as a parent, how I talk to my own children, and I watch for language as we describe other people: strange, ugly, weird, stupid, crazy, lazy. Though that's how you start to lay the groundwork. It's the gateway to stereotyping and hate. And so when I coach leaders, I often will ask them, like, I remember a leader once coming to me, a white leader, and saying, Black Lives Matter. I am an ally for the Black community. What else can I be doing? And so you do the exercise with the individual of saying, okay, so let's talk about, how do you spend your weekends? Where do you get your haircut? Where do you go grocery shopping? Who are your neighbors? When you have a life decision or something to celebrate, who are the 5 people who are not in your family that you call? And if they all act like you, look like you, and think like you, let's just be honest that we're self-segregating. And if you don't have any meaningful relationships with Black people in your life, and then you come to me at work and say, hey, Black Lives Matter, there's really a mismatch there. And so I think the work really starts at home. So when it can be really successful, and I've seen this with individuals who have someone in their life at home who is holding them accountable, you see that individual show up differently. It could be the wife, sister, aunt, husband, and they'll ask me things like, I noticed X, Y, and Z in this training, or I noticed you talked about these things, but you left this out. I was like, oh, tell me more, right? I did that purposely because we're really early on our journey here. And this was really a one size fits all conversation. But that's where I see things. People need to do this work on their own. One training I put you through for 3 hours, there's not much I can do there. I'm going to stop because I'm on a roll. Smita,
This is so interesting though, because I think why inclusion is so hard. And I don't know if it's so hard, but it's why
it is difficult. Yeah.
Why is it people are viewing it in the construct of their workplace?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When they really need to be looking at it in the construct of their life and their relationships and their life experiences. I always talk about building diverse teams. And I don't just mean racially, ethnically diverse. I mean, like, I want people who have different life experiences.
Every dimension of diversity, right? Yeah, every dimension.
Financial diversity, political diversity, I think Absolutely. Is so interesting. So I want to transition a little bit in terms of your role as a marketer, right? And how that world has really meshed with your world in DE&I. And you talked about this phrase that I love, which is diversity dressing.
Yes.
Right? And so I want you to tell me a little bit about diversity dressing, what you were seeing in the marketplace, how you coined it. I think it's a really interesting topic.
Well, I coined it very simply. I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm on LinkedIn more, but I'm on Instagram. I'm flipping through, I'm still a beauty person, Smita. I love beauty products. So I was looking through and I saw a beauty brand. I won't name the brand. They had an image that was of a Black woman, stunning with gorgeous makeup. And so for me as a consumer, if something works on someone who is darker skinned, if it works for a Black woman who has dark skin, it's going to work for me. And so I always look for that. I was like, I want that eyeshadow. I want that blush. I want that lipstick. Okay. So I go on the website. I'm going down the rabbit hole. Smita, they don't sell the products. It's called diversity dressing. So it is this facade you're putting up of like, okay, so I am checking the diversity box. I put an image of a Black woman wearing makeup. I'm a beauty brand, but I don't sell the products. As you talk about diversity in all its dimensions, we talk about body inclusivity. Vogue recently, not too long ago, had an article about this as well, that they want to show body inclusivity on the runway or in images, but are those actual pieces available? And they're not, right? Oftentimes they're not. And so that's the mismatch. Like that's the marketing, right? You can position yourself any way you want, but then people are going to look for actually, I would say, the receipts. Where is the eyeshadow? Where is the blush? Where is the lipstick? Oh, you don't have any of it. So that's why I coined it diversity dressing. And then we shared it on our podcast as a watch out for any leader who's trying to make change in this space.
So it's so funny that you talk about how quickly trust can be broken. And we actually have done, obviously 20 years of research on this, but when you're a trusted brand, which is when you've done the hard work to be a trusted brand, brands make mistakes, people make mistakes. But when you make that mistake, people are more likely to stand by you. So I think it's really important in terms of marketers, right? And I meet with a lot of marketers who are clients or not clients or prospective clients. And they say, wow, this work is really hard though. Like it takes a commitment, and it does, but it's so valuable to do because there's so many times where we all make mistakes, right? But people will stick by you if they know that you're doing the right thing. So it does feel really daunting, right? Like we could make a mistake, we could say the wrong thing. And, you could get into a space where people feel like maybe I shouldn't say anything then. Maybe I shouldn't do anything.
I wanted to add to this is like when you have diversity of representation around the table, I don't find, the work is hard, but it's important and it's a must do. I've never thought that I'm going to walk away from that commitment because of my life experience, right? And so isn't that interesting?
Right.
I think there's also a place of privilege that you might come from if you say, well, I could walk away from this work.
Right. Or maybe it's easier just to not.
It's easier not to
because we could offend. And I think this is, again, like we'd said, in terms of microaggressions or situations, people might feel like it's not intended, right? But
absolutely.
But it's still, it still hurts, right? So so what do you think are some brands that are doing really well in this space? Because you can probably talk about those, that they're really in. Yeah.
I try to be a half glass full person. My husband's half glass empty. So we balance each other out, but you have to be, listen, progress is slow, but I try to be positive in this space because you have to be. Beauty obsessive. I'm such a fan of Sephora. I love Sephora. I think it was back in 2018 or 2019, they were accused of a racist experience in store, a customer experience. But what I will say to you is, anytime you lose trust, our relationships with brands are like our relationships with each other, right? They're relationships. It's how we treat each other. And so you've made a mistake. You did something wrong. How are you going to rebuild the trust in the relationship? And it's all those steps along the way. So we sit now in 2022 and Sephora, my God, the progress they have made, it just makes my heart sing. From upskilling beauty advisors to their accelerator, where they're trying to get more BIPOC founders on shelf and get them ready for retail in Sephora, in e-commerce. They did, Smita, in recent history, one of the biggest studies on racial bias in retail. And every retailer should be downloading and studying this because they actually took a lot of their own recommendations into account. Like, let's actually properly train our beauty advisors versus having a ton of security in store. Let's train them on, I'm sure this is, I won't assume it's happened to you. It's happened to me on many occasions when I've been racially profiled in store, right? Like all of those things. And so I look at them and I'm like, wow, they have done a lot of great work. And you might have looked at them a few years ago and been like, and look at where they are today, but they didn't stop. The commitment's been there.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting, Mita, in the sense we were sort of talking about inclusion being hard, right? But we should also talk about the huge upside of inclusion, right? Let's talk about that. In the case of Sephora that you pointed out, right? They focused on the right hiring, they focused on the right training, and I'm sure their audiences have grown in that process. They spent the money in the right places to build brand love and to build these audiences. So I think there's also something that we don't often talk about, which is like the benefits of inclusion.
Absolutely. Can I also bring up what we worked on years ago, which was good humor?
Yes, please.
Good humor, leader in ice cream. This is when back in the day when I was with Smita, partners in crime at Unilever. And this was right around the diversity tipping point right afterwards. Good Humor hasn't operated ice cream trucks in the US since the 1970s, but many of us remember and still know the jingle. I know the jingle of the ice cream jingle when the truck comes. And that jingle actually we discovered had racist roots. It was called Turkey in the Straw, and it was tied back to minstrel shows that took place, part of America's history and the institution of slavery. And so the brand team actually said, well, this is the time where you stand up for values. We don't actually own these trucks anymore, but we're going to redo the song. And the song was redone. And then there was a part 2 of working with the owners of the ice cream trucks to replace the jingle. And I thought that was like a really proud moment working with you and the team, is I thought, my God, like we could have been silent on this. Who cares? We don't own these ice cream trucks, but we discovered it. And it was a moment of education. So I think it's also what you said about values. It's like, you can say you're going to stand for values, but when are you ready to stand up for them? Right? Like you can say Black Lives Matter, right? You could put that on Instagram and you can say, well, my brand has really nothing to do with this. Or you can say, hey, I'm going to lead and change what's in existence and educate people.
I love that you brought up good humor, and that was totally naturally. But I do think there is also that element of, we talk about another way to build trust is going beyond your core business.
Yes.
Right. Solving a problem beyond your core business. And that was a great example.
Well, you do all that. You all do that all the time. And I know you're too modest. So I wanted to do that and bring it up because we have many great examples of work, but that one was like, wow, it was so good. So good.
Definitely a career highlight for all of us who were involved in that one. It felt really good to do the right thing. And I also, on a cultural level, the song is like so good. Also, what I love about that one is that our kids are hearing that song.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it's as joyous as ice cream is. So on this like positive note, because we're coming off of ice cream, we've got to keep it going. What advice do you have? So there's, the term allies. I'm an ally, right? How would you define an ally? And what advice do you have for allies, particularly women, white women in the workplace? Because I think that's a big one where I'm hearing of a lot of women standing up saying, I want to be an ally.
Well, number one, I will say, I'm not an ally until someone says I am. So I'll give you an example. I'm not an ally for the Black community. I'm on a journey to be an ally for the Black community. It's a journey. There's no destination. There's no card you get that says I'm an ally. My friend Smita, you'd have to ask Dee and say, do you think Mita's an ally for the community? And she would say, yeah, Mita shows up for me. Or actually, Mita has some work to do in how she shows up for us. So that is the piece of like just the humility of allyship. I think, when it comes to, interestingly enough, the intersection of white women and women of color, Dee and I have a podcast episode that'll drop on Jane Campion and the Serena Williams sisters and what happened at the Critic Choice Awards. And you all can Google this. You've all probably seen what unfolded. But I think the lesson there is the humility for white women to understand that there are differences in being a white woman and being a Black woman in corporate spaces, and that sexism isn't always the one thing that will rally us. There is the intersectionality of sexism and racism. So it is that understanding for white women to really build deep, meaningful relationships with other women who don't have your life experience, as you were saying earlier. I think the other thing I would say, the tips I give to allies is like, if I'm going to come and share something that's happened, Smita, with you because I trust you, I've had a racist experience at work. Your job is not to dismiss it or minimize it. Your job is not to be an investigative journalist. Your job is not to say, oh, so-and-so would never say that. Are you sure that's what happened? Because then you're going to break the trust. I'm never going to come back to you again. And what is so uncomfortable about these conversations? And it's interesting when people say courageous conversations on race, because I would argue you and I have had to have these conversations our whole life. There wasn't one moment I woke up and said, oh, let's have a courageous conversation on race. It's been my life experience. But what I would say to you is we are so trained as leaders to problem solve that when we enter these conversations, they leave us feeling uncomfortable because there's no closure at the end. Because I've just shared something that's happened and you want to fix it. You can't fix it. I'm coming to you because there's safety in our relationship, because I trust you, because I need someone. And your job is to really say, like, thank you so much for sharing your truth. What can I be doing to help support you? Like, how can I be helping you? And I might say nothing. I might cry and you might be uncomfortable and it might be awkward and silent. You might check in on me in a few weeks. I might come back to you. I mean, this is the work, right? And so that's why I think a lot of allies are uncomfortable to enter these conversations.
I think that's so interesting about just listening, right?
Yes.
The basic sort of practice of just listening and hearing out people's stories, not making a judgment on those stories, but in fact, just being there for them. But there's also something about advocating, right?
Yes.
For people of color in the industry and being an ally. And I think you have an episode that's out that's about what happens when you're mistaken for another brown woman in your company. Mm-hmm. I love, there's one personal story on my end, my name is like definitely something that's been a source of anxiety, maybe for myself in the industry, because people find it hard to pronounce. There's no H in it. I've taken liberties of now including in my signature, pronounced as Smita, right? We actually did a campaign for Race Equality Week.
Yes, that was amazing. That was amazing.
It was one of my favorite campaigns. I feel like it was created for us, and where we created a LinkedIn campaign that just had this simple pronunciation of our names, and everyone shared their stories of their names, which was really beautiful. But what we found in that is like, your name is so important, right? And if someone mistakes you, it's so important, because if we keep on referring to Mita in the room, and it's, if we're talking about the great work that Mita's doing, but if we're uncomfortable about saying Mita's name, we won't actually say her name.
Absolutely.
Right. And I would see that with people at Edelman. I would see that with clients. They almost just wouldn't say my name because there was anxiety around not sure how to pronounce it. Right. So I think there's such richness there, but tell us a little bit about some advice you gave in that podcast around what happens when you're actually mistaken for another employee.
Oh gosh, where do I start? Well, here's the thing. If you are mistaking someone repeatedly, Smita, Mita, Smita, you actually are just treating us like bottles. Like, labels belong on bottles, not people, because what you've just done in your head is said, here are all the brown women and they all look the same. Because if you knew one thing about me, if you knew that I love beauty products, I love a lot of milk with my coffee, I love beautiful journals, yes, I love McDonald's, like, you remember one detail about me, you'll never forget my name. So you've never done the work. It's like a lazy shortcut in your head. And so what I shared in the episode is like, for all these things that have happened to me in my life and my career, where were the other people that saw these things happening and didn't stand up for me? So when you go and listen to the episode, me being constantly mistaken for Shilpa, one of my colleagues, was anyone ever going to say anything until finally a white man was like, what is so hard about this? Why do you keep inviting her to the right? But it just took somebody, because you know what? There are power dynamics in our organizations. If my boss is doing this to me, which has happened on many occasions, it's hard for me to speak up. And guess what? I'm tired. Sometimes I'm tired of being the one who has to advocate for myself. I'm exhausted. And there's, as Dee and I talk about, the research from Catalyst, well documented on the emotional tax women of color and the burden we face constantly of how we show up and how we're viewed and what are people going to think of what we say or do. But imagine an ally just steps up and interrupts and educates and intervenes. And we always say it's never too late. So in that moment, if I'm being mistaken for Smita and you don't feel like you can say anything then, you can always go to the person later and say, listen, I'm not sure I'm noticing this behavior. This has happened a few times and I'd love to talk to you about it. So that person, if you don't do it in a public setting because you feel like the power dynamics wouldn't allow for it, pull them aside and have that conversation, and then check in with the people who are the targets and say, I'm noticing this. I want you to know you're not alone. Like, what can I do to support you?
I love that. Again, another example of just like, I don't even know if that's being an ally. It's also just being a human, right?
Human. It is.
Yeah, like
showing up as a human. But I'm telling you, and you know this because you've been there too, too many of us are bystanders watching things happen and not saying and doing anything. I've been guilty about it for myself. I've been guilty about it for other people. I'm learning and growing too, right? And there's moments I wish I could go back and I wish I had spoken up on behalf of someone. I wish I had stood up for someone and I didn't. And I'm trying to be better.
I think yes. And I think that's it's even eye-opening to say that like, we all need to do work in this space. It doesn't matter if you're a white colleague, a male colleague, a female colleague, a person of color, like we all could be doing better in this space of inclusion. Okay, so I wanted to end on something good, right? Like, because it's tough. These conversations are really tough. But when you think about, the journey, the continuous journey that we're on from an inclusion space in the workplace, what progress have you seen? And like, what gives you hope for the future?
I see a lot of progress. I don't know if we'd be having these conversations 2-3 years ago. We were, just not in a meaningful, deep way. I think like having white leaders who come to me and ask these questions, like, what does it mean to be an ally? How can I understand and show up for the Black community when we think about Black Lives Matter? We didn't get a chance to talk about the astonishing the rate of Asian hate crimes in this country and xenophobia, right? I am just encouraged by the people who are asking questions who normally wouldn't, who want to show up and help. That's what I'm really encouraged by, because here's the thing, we're all changing, here's the thing, we are all chasing inclusive companies. Like it's an elusive North Star. Guess what? It starts with each and every one of us. And that's the work I'm doing at Carta and started doing at Carta is like, hey, how do we build inclusive leaders? Because how I show up every day matters and has a ripple effect on my team and the company. And so that's what gets you to an inclusive culture. It's how we each show up. And then I just want to say, like, I'm just really, so encouraged about like all the great content and marketing I'm seeing in the place. I have to end by talking about Bridgerton season 2, which I'm writing about for Ad Week. But oh my God, to see dark-skinned brown women on screen and to see like how you authentically storytell a lived experience without tokenizing, like that should be in a marketing playbook somewhere. It was just beautifully done.
Here. We can have another podcast about.
Yes, please invite me back.
I will. But thank you, Mita, for your time today. Time is, I know, a very valuable resource right now, but this conversation was just so fulfilling and learned so much. And I just love the work that you're doing to build trust in the workplace, in communities. And I hope you keep doing what you're doing because it's so important for the world to hear about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the TrustMakers, an Edelman podcast in partnership with Advertising Week, where we speak with leaders and other trust builders across institutions. See you next time.